Welcome to Truth Watchers. I am Heath Henning. We are continuing the discussion of Homo Naledi today. I'm sure people don't understand the importance of this single discovery, but it is relevant for a number of reasons. One reason is because the size of the discovery. To date, it is the largest discovery of bones. A second reason is the fact that it has remained in the media for over 10 years now, and it's not going to go away. A third reason is because it has challenged a number of the evolutionary ideas from the past. It is literally being used to reshape the way evolution is taught today. Obviously, I'm not an evolutionist, but the issue with it constantly changing is that it becomes an untestable hypothesis. The thinking of evolution alters to fit new discoveries that don't fit within the original concept of evolution. Scientifically speaking, this speaks against it since it doesn't fulfill a predicted expectation. However, every time the hypothesis is altered to fit new evidence, the argument to refute it has to cover the newest expression of evolution. Looking at the dating of Homo naledi bones is an example of this issue. Originally, Lee Berger was hoping to see the bones dated around 2 million years old, so he could claim his discovery to be the oldest intentional burial site. However, the dating methods didn't pan out so well for this expectation. The earliest public acknowledgement of Homo naledi fossil dates appear in Lee Berger's book Almost Human. Berger initially stated that the fossils were, quote, less than 450,000 years old, and later clarified on the same page that they were dated, quote, between 450,000 and 250,000 years ago, unquote. However, the origin of the 450,000 year figure remains unclear, as official reports instead consistently specified, quote, Homo naledi lived sometime between 335 to 236,000 years ago, making it relatively young, unquote. Or more generally described it as a young age of 300,000 years. Gene O'Mix and Dr. Timothy L. Clary, reviewing Berger's claims, raised a critical question. Quote, nearly all of the uranium-thorium dates of the teeth and the carbon dates of the bones indicates an age less than 100,000 years old. Why Berger and his team chose the older dates is not explained in his book or even adequately explained in their paper, unquote. This discrepancy highlights a lack of transparency in the dating process and raises questions about the selection of specific data points. According to Berger and Hawk's second book, Cave of Bones, pages 60 through 61, the electron spin resonance analysis of 3 teeth yielded dates of 104,000 years, 139,000 years, and 335,000 years. Uranium series dating of flowstones provided an age of 243,000 years, with an error range of 7,000 years. Based on these results, the team ultimately settled on an age range of 236,000 to 335,000 years. However, it also noted, quote, the laboratory carrying out the radiocarbon analysis of 3 naledi bone fragments said that 2 of the fragments were estimated to be less than 35,000 years old, unquote. These findings highlight a significant variation in dating results, ranging from less than 35,000 years to as high as 335,000 years, with Berger's earliest suggestion at 450,000, though there's absolutely no supporting data reported for this high of a date. However, despite the technical precision claimed in their methodology, the peer review paper reporting on the dating method repeatedly highlighted the speculative and assumption-driven nature of the calculations, as evidenced by statements such as, quote, calculated ages are based on the assumption of continuous diffusion, unquote. And, quote, ages were calculated assuming closed system behavior and compared with age results assuming continuous diffusion models, unquote. And, quote, in calculating the ages for all samples assuming, therefore, in calculating the ages we have assumed, an estimate has to be made for the burial history of the teeth as well as the more general background radiation in the cave, unquote. Another quote says, quote, in all calculations we have made the following assumptions. 1. Post thorium 230 daughter elements are in equilibrium in dental tissues, which is the standard assumption in electrospin resonance dating, and 2. Complete effective burial of the samples occurred, that is, infinite matrix assumptions for the gamma dose rate measured in sediment, unquote. Another statement says, quote, the optical stimulated luminescence results are more difficult to interpret than the uranium series electron spin resonance results, not only because we have to assume model parameters to estimate the environmental dose rate, but also because we have few constraints on the origin and provenance of the quartz grain that were sampled. Thus, the minimum age model age is likely to provide a maximum age estimate for the Unit 1 sediments and must be viewed with caution, unquote. Another quote from the paper says, quote, a major issue is whether radon 222 degassing was a process that operated continuously over the past 300,000 years or not. Escape of radon 222 half-life 3.82 days is likely, although it seems unlikely that an extreme degassing environment similar to the 80% measured today was maintained during the entire history of burial, unquote. Another statement in the paper stated, quote, we have no reason to prefer one age result over another, unquote. One more citation of a similar nature from that paper, quote, the extremely complex nature of sedimentary cave fill in many cave systems involved repeated cycles of deposition, erosion, and reworking, leading to complex and sometimes contradictory age results, unquote. These admissions underscore the conjectural nature of dating process. Given the multitudes of assumptions, conflicting data, and admitting complexities, there is little reason to accept the proposed age range as scientifically reliable. The reliability of the dating methods used for the Homo naledi fossils become even more questionable when considering the impact of the environmental conditions, particularly water exposure. The researchers acknowledged the water exposure could render certain samples unreliable. For instance, quote, the high uranium values in sample 1767 are probably the result of its greater exposure to water, confirmed by its extremely weathered nature. Given these factors, we do not trust the reliability of the age results for sample 1767 and have excluded this tooth from the final age estimates for the fossils, unquote. This admission raises a critical question. If water exposure renders some samples unreliable, how can any sample remain unaffected after allegedly lying in the damp cave environment for supposedly 300,000 years? This factor was noted by the researchers expressing the potential contamination of the teeth's samples. Quote, however, the dose rate can vary over time as uranium can be highly mobile in wet environments and can move in and out of teeth, unquote. The researchers also reported numerous instances of samples contaminated by water exposure. For example, they noted, quote, the tooth, sample 1767, is brittle and appears strongly affected by water action, unquote. Another sample, 1788, was similarly described, quote, the dentine, that is the tooth sample 1788, is highly bleached and brittle and appears affected by water action, unquote. Despite the contamination, sample 1788 was considered one of the most reliable for determining a date. Quote, the best age estimate for the Homo naledi fossils comes from the averaged uranium series electron spin resonance age for samples 1788 and 1810, unquote. The researchers also detailed the results of radiocarbon dating. They described, quote, 3 weathered bone fragments of Homo naledi were analyzed via radiocarbon dating at Beta Analytic Inc., Florida, USA. Analysis indicated that no collagen was present in any of the samples and that the bone appeared possibly cremated. This was investigated with a bone carbonate extraction technique. Tests did not support cremation and indicated that extensive secondary calcium carbonate replacement had occurred, providing ages of 33,000, give or take 200 years, and 35,500 years, give or take 160 years, for 2 of the fragments. We interpret these ages to relate to late calcite precipitation in the bones that may reflect a wet period in the cave, unquote. These findings illustrate how water contamination can lead to significant confusion, especially when it alters sample composition and interferes with radiocarbon dating results. This raises serious questions about the reliability of the dating process in such challenging environmental conditions. Furthermore, the evidence for water weathering on the Naledi bones is apparent in the significant percentage of missing bones and the extensive erosion observed on most of the remaining specimens. Lee Berger acknowledged the precarious condition of the finds in his book Almost Human, stating, quote, we were lucky to have found them before erosion destroyed the deposits altogether, unquote. This is significant because Berger and his team have consistently denied the water transport could have been the cause for these bones to have been collected in this deep, difficult to reach cave chamber. Their desire to claim this as a ceremonial burial has forced them to ignore and downplay the obvious fact that water had a major impact on these bones. Moreover, Aurora Vail expressed some data fitting with water transport hypothesis. She wrote, quote, despite the impression given by Berger et al., in which figured elements are depicted in such a way as to force the suggestion that most of the remains could be refitted into a near complete individual, the majority of the fossils are isolated and fragmented. If the minimum number of individuals composing the fossil sample is indeed 15, the current percentage of bone survival of the hominid assemblage is only 10.8%, with 2,757 bones missing. While the authors state that, quote, in general, the Homo naledi assemblage contains many articulated elements, unquote, a thorough reading reveals that only 4 articulated groups have been collected, namely a hand, a foot, a mandible with a skull, and an ankle. By comparison, the Australopithecus sediba fossils attributed to only 2 individuals preserve 6 fully articulated joints and 10 articulations in close proximity, unquote. If the bones arrived by deliberate moving of dead bodies, where are all the missing portions of their bodies? Only 10.8% are counted for. This sounds like either the bones were transported by water, but if they claim the loss is due to erosion, there is no reason to think their dating methods reflect a reality from uncontaminated samples. Another interesting study was performed that suggested the bone accumulation was spontaneous. This study compared known archaic burial sites with the assemblage at the Naledi chamber. Taking into consideration the randomness, lack of articulated body parts, the loss of bone material, and inclusion of other animal bones, their computer analysis clustered the Naledi chamber assemblage with other known discoveries that represented scavenged corpses or natural accumulation of the dead in caves. They wrote, quote, "Nevertheless, the recurrent clustering of the Dinaladi chamber assemblage with the disturbed and carnivore consumed samples and, in particularly, the naturally accumulated bone sample of cave baboons is intriguing," unquote. Dr. Tim Clary from the Institute of Creation Research has proposed a logical explanation with the mechanism of water transportation for the bones to have arrived in this cave chamber. I strongly agree with his perspective, which in turn challenges the categorization of this discovery as Homo. The Homo designation has been defended by the inferred behavior, assuming ceremonial burial practices. But if this behavior is not a valid inference from the data available, there's no reason to designate the discovery as Homo. If you are interested in more detail concerning dating, the bone assemblage, and assessment of the bones themselves, and much more, check out my new book, Is It Human? Assessing the Homo Naledi Debate. This is Heath Henning. Thank you for tuning into Truth Watchers podcast. Remember to hit the subscribe button and share it with a friend. For more fascinating facts, check us out at truthwatchers.com, because sound apologetics and exegesis of scriptures is important for all of God's children. As it is indicated in 3 John verse 4, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth.